Welcome to our channel. Today, we will talk about military events from 60 years ago. In this video, you will learn about how American soldiers treated female captives in Vietnam, what happened to Vietnamese women in captivity, and why were they so afraid to end up there. What role did Vietnamese women play in the army? And we will also tell the truth about a horrifying incident known as Incident on Hill 192. Be sure to watch the video to the end to learn about everything in order. The beginning of the military campaign. As many of you know, the war in Vietnam officially began in 1955. However, key events in the Southeast Asian state began as early as 1857. It was then that the French government accused Vietnam of lacking any democracy and therefore subjugated the territory to its influence. Thus, Vietnam became a colony of French dominion. Of course, over the years, the Vietnamese government did not forgive Europe's actions. Already in 1941, a movement for independence began. The well-known politician Ho Chi Minh stood against many countries that had any claims to the Vietnamese people. Finally, on September 2, 1945, a communist state was formed. But even this event did not resolve all issues. As is known, the country is divided into two main parts: North Vietnam and South Vietnam. The former was supported by several communist states, including the Soviet Union and China. South Vietnam, on the contrary, was supported by capitalist countries, especially America. Soon, these contradictions led to the fact that in 1961 of the last century, the US troops were introduced into the territory of North Vietnam. Thus began a full-scale military campaign. Let's discuss the issue of women who participated in this war. The communist government of North Vietnam, led by Ho Chi Minh, introduced laws prohibiting the beating of women, forced marriages, and child marriages, and proclaiming equality between women and men. That is why North Vietnamese women became important participants in the war against American soldiers in the ranks of the Viet Cong. At least 1.5 million women served in the armed forces of North Vietnam during this war. Some women did not serve but constantly helped them with labor, caring for the wounded, transporting goods along secret routes, spying against the American army, or setting up stretchers and traps against the enemy. Women of North Vietnam played an important role in creating and maintaining safe routes for Ho Chi Minh, which the U.S. National Security Agency called one of the greatest achievements of military technology of the 20th century, for their effectiveness in supplying troops. Despite the fact that these routes were the subject of one of the most intense air interception campaigns in history, volunteer women not only repaired existing roads and laid new ones, expanding the network of safe supply routes for the army, but also transported weapons and ammunition along them, served as guides and observers. Women made a significant contribution to the espionage efforts of North Vietnam. They successfully disguised themselves and, under the guise of service personnel, infiltrated American military bases. Both the women who served in the Viet Cong and those who spied for it were in great danger, as capture meant almost inevitable torture, followed by imprisonment or execution. In the prisons of South Vietnam, thousands of women prisoners were held in appalling conditions, including those as young as 15 years old. One famous spy was Nguyen Van Thi Loan, who was captured and skillfully pretended to have gone mad from the torture she was subjected to. At that moment, the southern Vietnamese freely gave her confidential information out of pity for the harmless old woman. She then escaped from captivity and passed the information to the Viet Cong. Another woman, Vu Thi Hong, who received a 20-year prison sentence from South Vietnamese officials, smiled and replied, "Your government will not last long." This smile, captured by an American photographer, became one of the vivid symbols of the resistance. Sisters Phu Thi Tam and Phu Thi Dao were imprisoned in Con Dao for attempting to blow up the Central Police Station in Saigon. During their imprisonment, they compiled a list of political prisoners held in Con Dao and smuggled it out to be used as evidence during negotiations for the Paris Peace Accords. However, not everyone was lucky enough to end up in prison. In this photo, you can see the victims of a mass execution in My Lai. These are women who are about to be killed by soldiers. In a sense, what the Americans were doing was even more barbaric than the Nazis. For example, thanks to journalists, the horrifying story known as the incident on Hill 192 gained notoriety. 5 American soldiers, during a reconnaissance raid in Viet Cong-controlled territory, conspired with each other to abduct a young Vietnamese woman from the village of Cat Chuong. They originally planned to use her for pleasure during their 5-day mission, and then, before returning from the raid, to kill and hide her. The victim was 21-year-old Phan Thi Mel. She was abducted in the morning, and in the evening, when the camp was set up, 4 soldiers, 1 dissenting, committed violence. The next day, there was a shootout with the Viet Cong. The girl tried to escape, but she was killed. This story was brought to fame by Brian De Palma in 1989 in the film Casualties of War, in which Back to the Future trilogy star Michael J. Fox played the one soldier who did not participate in the rape, but also did not save the girl. Under pressure from the public, several years after this crime, the rapists were brought to trial. They received long prison sentences, and the murderer was even sentenced to the death penalty. However, in the end, they were all pardoned and released early. This is just one episode that happened to become public knowledge. During the Vietnam War, a significant number of war crimes were committed, and violence specifically against women was widespread. This incident, which journalists accidentally learned about and told the world about, was not unique. Raping captive Viet Cong women in combat zones was seen as a duty to avenge the enemy and show one's bravery. Captive women who were raped were often subsequently killed, or, if the women were more attractive, they were subjected to further sexual exploitation. Americans practiced this during the Korean War as well. So, let's sum up the war and talk about the losses on both sides. In 1973, there was a complete withdrawal of American troops from Vietnamese territory. Almost everyone understood that it was pointless to fight against an army experienced in terms of local knowledge. 2 years later, the Republic of Vietnam finally emerged victorious. The number of casualties on both the American and Vietnamese sides is staggering. It is known that during the years of the war, Americans lost up to 60,000 soldiers, and 300,000 were listed as wounded and injured. Also, approximately 1.3 thousand servicemen are listed as missing or prisoners of war. The losses on the Vietnamese side, however, far exceed those of the USA. According to statistics, South Vietnam lost 200,000 soldiers, while the number of servicemen along with insurgents from North Vietnam amounts to 1 million people. It is worth noting that not only troops suffered, but also the residents of Southeast Asia. Their losses are estimated at 700,000 people. Finally, 6.5 million Vietnamese were recognized as refugees. What do you think? Who won this war and what could explain the cruelty of American soldiers? Write your opinion in the comments, like, and subscribe to the channel. All this will greatly help in its promotion.